Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm going to be your host for this episode. So today we are going to welcome an international integrated pest management expert, Dr. Paul Horne. Welcome, Paul, from Melbourne in Australia. And Paul has been over to New Zealand a number of times over the last 10 years, and he's here to run a series of workshops on integrated pest management. So before we start asking some interesting questions about the benefit of IPM, Paul, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. So I'm an entomologist, and for the last 26 years I've run a very small company called IPM Technologies, and we aim to help farmers to control pests with minimal use of insecticides, and we call that IPM.
So this is obviously, the company's been in existence for how many years? About 20 years?
26.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing over that time, you've seen quite a lot of change in people's attitudes towards IPM. Do you think that people know what IPM is now? Like, if we just say to growers, have you tried IPM? Is there a lot of awareness now around what IPM is?
It varies significantly. It depends a lot on the industry. So some industries are very aware about IPM, they use IPM, but there's also a lot of misconceptions about what IPM involves. And one of the most common problems that we have to face is when farmers say, we tried IPM and it didn't work. And of course they didn't try IPM, they tried something like stopping using insecticides or relying totally on biological control or thinking that it just meant organic farming. So the term IPM is very vague. And
yes. And of course, it really did start out primarily being focused on pest control. But I think now people are using it to encompass all aspects of, sort of integrated pest, and pest being pathogens, insect pests, and even weeds. Would that be right?
Yes. So sometimes you hear IPDM, where the D is for diseases.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a holistic thing. I did find a scientific paper where something like 63 published definitions of IPM.
Oh gosh. Yeah, let's just stick to one and let's make it really simple. Okay, so how would you define IPM? I mean, you've obviously done lots of workshops and consultancy over the years. So when you start off talking to growers, how do you define it?
So my definition is fairly simple, I think. I think it doesn't matter what the farmer's trying to grow, whether it's ornamental flowers or wheat, barley, canola crops or broccoli or lettuce. Each of them have a set of pests, and there's only 3 control options they can choose from. And that's biological control, so the insects and mites that eat the pests. There's cultural controls, which are management tools, which is a very wide ranging set of options from the variety you choose, time of planting, irrigation, anything that is a management tool. And the third option is pesticides. Mm-hmm. So integrated pest management is just trying to use the best combination of those 3 things in a compatible way.
Yes. And so, we talked about this just briefly. What change have you seen over the last 20 years in growers actually prepared to embrace IPM? Do you think that there is a genuine desire to reduce, for example, reliance on solely pesticides and actually look for a more diversified sort of crop protection program?
Yes, certainly there's more growers now that just want to avoid or minimise using pesticides. But unfortunately, the most common reason that people call me is when there's a crisis. And so, unfortunately, it's human nature, not just with pest control, but with most things, to keep doing the same thing until there's a really strong reason to do something different.
And so that crisis, is that often that the pesticides are no longer working or are no longer available?
Both of those. So insecticide resistance is the driver in many cases, or if the pesticides are withdrawn. And so if, for example, there's a pesticide registered and then the government decides it's not going to be available, that's one way. Chemical companies also withdraw products. They're not banned. And if you want to sell your product interstate or overseas, then you have to abide by the requirements of the country you're selling to, not just the home country. So, market access is also a driver.
So, I mean, assuming that there are pesticides available, how do you sell to the grower the value proposition around moving to a more integrated sort of pest management system?
We actually have strong support from some chemical companies that have selective pesticides that come onto the market, and they're usually more expensive, but the last thing that they would want is to lose those very expensive products that they've spent millions of dollars getting to market. They don't want to lose them in a very short period of time because of resistance. Mm-hmm. And so the best way to prolong the use of a selective insecticide is to fit it in with an IPM program. So you get better value out of the pesticide, you use less pesticides, so it's cheaper for the farmer overall, even though individual products might cost more. The cost of pest control is less, it's more sustainable, and there's minimal use of pesticides.
So if we look at the two strategies, the cultural and the biological, what are the key things that you are encouraging growers to do? I mean, what are the range of cultural practices that they can consider, and what are the options with respect to biological control?
So the first thing is don't kill the biological controls. So taking out the broad spectrum insecticides wherever possible is the first step. Then the cultural controls, as I said before, they're many and varied. So if it was possible, resistant varieties can eliminate the need for pesticides or even biological control. Irrigation practices, time of planting, so avoiding pest problems, harvesting at different times. All of these things have an impact, but also doing things that encourage beneficials. So it doesn't necessarily mean planting another crop as providing a nectar source, although that some people do that. Simply providing a habitat that is suitable for beneficial insects and mites to survive. So, for example, with minimum tillage, stubble retention, that on its own favours a whole suite of soil-dwelling and surface-dwelling invertebrates that are predatory. So if that's not there, if it's bare ground, there isn't the habitat for beneficial species. Mm-hmm. So most of these things are done anyway for other reasons, but they have an impact on the population of beneficial species that are often resident in a paddock.
So, I mean, obviously for an arable grower where you're dealing with a rotation, you might have, up to 10 different crops that you're growing. I mean, are we expecting growers to have to design IPM programs for every crop, or are we looking at it as a more of a whole, rotation system? Otherwise, it's going to get incredibly sort of like time-consuming and sort of complicated to manage.
It depends. If the grower wants to look after resident beneficial species in one paddock, then obviously every crop that goes in, has the potential for them to be disrupted or to be favoured. So pesticide use, again, is key. But you want to look after the beneficial species that are there, but there's also, in addition to the resident species, there's transient species, so ones that move in and move out. So they will come and go no matter what the history of the paddock has been. So, and in many cases, the generalist predators and the key parasitoids, the things that parasitise pests, are the same in different crops. So you get generalists like brown lacewings, which eat aphids, and they're not too fussy which aphids they eat. So they'll be present in a range of crops.
So obviously monitoring for the presence of these parasitoids and predators is a key sort of component. How does a grower know when to go out and look and what to look for?
Yeah, that's often the hardest thing. And to be honest, a lot of IPM manuals put growers off because they think if we have to know all this, it's too hard. So I think the key is to provide information for the specific pests and beneficials that the grower needs to be aware of and provide the information on when to go and look. So in my experience, growers often are unaware of the range of beneficial species. They're not too bad at identifying the pests, but once they're shown what the beneficial species look like and how to recognise them, it's then quite easy for them to do. It's the transition that's hard from not being aware of them, not being able to identify them and relying on them. Once growers know that they're there and they can reliably know they're there, they're much more comfortable with making decisions based on those beneficial species.
So the easiest way to be able to support a grower, is it very much out in the field, literally showing growers this is one parasitoid and this is another, and this is the time in the development of the crop that you should be going out and having a look. So is it reasonably prescriptive?
Yeah, I think we've found over the last few years working with advisors, and those advisors could be even chemical resellers, but whoever gives advice to the farmer probably works with a whole range of farmers. And so in addition to farmers who are interested, we find educating advisors is also a really useful way of getting IPM adopted. And the help that advisors need is in making decisions that they initially don't feel comfortable with. So if they're used to prescribing a pesticide rather than choosing one that is compatible with some beneficial species, they need to know and they need to see an IPM strategy working.
Yeah. So from the grower's perspective, I guess their perception would be that it's more complicated and it takes more time and effort. Is that true? I mean, or is it something that, people have just put up as a reason why they don't make the effort? I mean, is it that difficult, or is it something that a grower can easily embrace as part of their normal management practices?
I think that in any particular crop, there's not that many pests, there's not that many beneficial species, and so for a grower to feel comfortable, it usually only takes one season, maybe two, for them to have someone there with them to help them make decisions.
Yeah.
After that, it's actually quite straightforward, and it's not that difficult.
So, I mean, obviously you've got a lot of experience working with growers in Australia. How well has IPM been sort of taken up and adopted?
Again, varying a lot between industries, but in some cases the results have been spectacular. And so with some berry crops, things like strawberries, where they faced a crisis with western flower thrips and two-spotted mite. They simply could not control them with pesticides. Adoption is, if it's not 100%, it's very, very close to 100%. I think it is, through Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, at the very least. And there's other industries where people have been used to using pesticides, insecticides, and once they've made the change to an IPM approach, their use has been reduced dramatically, and that's like across industries. Across the entire industry. Yeah. So, but most growers don't choose to use IPM to save money on pesticides.
No. But although when you look at the increasing cost of pesticides, I think that is possibly, a reason that they might consider it.
It's a really good. They'll take that every time, of course. No one, if you don't need it, then it's a bonus. But usually it's to control the pest, to get better control of pests in a sustainable way. That's the main reason.
So do you think that there has been a perception that, if you're not using pesticides and you move to IPM, that you wouldn't get as much control, and that yield being so important, particularly in arable systems, where profitability, your gross margins are pretty tight. You don't want to be losing any more yield than you have to. Is that still a potential challenge?
So if you remember, you asked why people use IPM, and, so the perception is if you use IPM, well, you're going to suffer in terms of quality. But in fact, the opposite is true. The people switch to using IPM because they can't achieve the level of control of pests that they want to with a conventional pesticide-only based approach. So in arable crops in Australia, there's probably some cheap insecticides that are still widely used, and while they're available, people will say we can't afford the alternatives. But the economics change, and we have worked with many arable growers, so wheat and barley, canola crops that they grow, where their reliance on insecticide has reduced so much that they wouldn't have believed it if I'd told them that that would be the case when I first met them.
What about biopesticides? Is there much recognition and awareness of the new sort of biological-based sort of products?
There's some products that have been around for many years, so some bacterial products. There's newer products now, some viruses that are, well used in conventional agriculture, horticulture and broadacre. And so there is a growing awareness, and also as they become more popular with the multinational companies producing them, I think it's definitely going to be something that we see far more of.
Yes, and obviously, how do you marry, I suppose, the pest management systems with the disease and the weed management systems? Do you get involved in that area as well, where, because you don't necessarily want to move down making various management changes and then find out that actually it might create a perverse outcome in your disease management program?
So in my particular case, we try and stick to the pest management. The only overlap is if farmers are using fungicides that have an impact on beneficial species, then we would ask them to look for alternatives to that. And that happens quite a lot in intensive horticulture.
Okay. So what about seed treatments? Like, where do they fit in? Do you see a range of different seed treatments as being part of IPM?
When we started working with broadacre farmers in Australia, the seed treatments were really a massive advantage to get growers to adopt a change. So we have some establishment pests, in particular red-legged earth mite, and the choice, at least back then, so I'm talking like 10, 15 years ago, would have been an organophosphate or a synthetic pyrethroid as a bare earth spray or a seed treatment. So obviously the seed treatment was, a far better option in terms of looking after beneficial species. I don't like if they become just routine and used all the time. As you said, monitoring is important, but some of the pesticides are neonicotinoids, some like fipronil are very residual, and so if they don't need to be used, I don't think they should be, but they have become standard practice.
Yeah. And sometimes, of course, growers have no choice. Like when they purchase seed, the seed comes with, 3 different sort of products, and they might not necessarily need 2 of them, but they haven't got much choice. And but I mean, that's something that they should still question, because at the end of the day, if you don't need to use those, why is it on the seed? So that becomes a bit sort of commercial. So what about some just, I guess, words of wisdom, for New Zealand growers about embracing IPM?
So arable farmers in particular, of course. I wouldn't think that they should be too scared of it. It's a different approach to using a regular spray program, but there's more and more products on the market that are selective, that can have an impact on the pest without disrupting beneficial species. And I would encourage people to, if they're interested at all, try it on a paddock. And our experience has been growers will try it on 1 paddock in year 1, and then they'll try it on maybe 3 or 4 in year 2, and then they'll do the whole farm in year 3. Yeah. But there's no need to try and switch over the entire farm in year 1.
Yep. And obviously different seasons bring different pest pressure. Under a low pest pressure, it may be an easier transition than if you have a couple of years where the pest pressure is really hard.
Yes, yeah, and as I said, we have these establishment pests, and if the particular paddock in question has a very, very high level of that pest, I'd suggest maybe try another paddock first.
Yeah. Well, that's really insightful, and I mean, obviously you've just here to do a whole load of workshops, and so there will be some people listening that have already attended your workshops. There'll be others that unfortunately missed out, but hopefully they'll be listening to this podcast. So thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.